All right, in this video, we're going to kind of keep going and really start to think about what we're going to be building and look at a little bit of HTML. So thing to keep in mind that was in the instructional materials that you read about is that there are layers of web design that we're really going to be working with. We're really going to be working with the HTML or the content layer and the CSS, which is called the presentation layer. If you really get into this, you get up to like JavaScript and what's called the behavior layer, and that really can go in a lot of different directions. But for this class, really what we're just focusing on are these two areas. And this is enough to kind of really get us started in terms of building out anything for the web. The HTML is just the content, and then as you move up the levels here, in the layers, you get a richer user experience, so you can do more as a user and interact with it. So if we flip over to what we're going to build for this particular set of modules, if I go in here and turn off all the CSS, this is what HTML looks like. It's not terribly exciting or interesting, and it actually might look a little crazy for you right now, but HTML, all it is labeling things, and that's something to keep in mind. You can get kind of overwhelmed sometimes with what's called syntax in terms of how you actually write it, but all we're really doing is labeling things, and in this case we're labeling content. So this is a heading, this is a paragraph, this is a heading, this is a paragraph, this is a heading, this is what's called a bulleted list or an unordered list. This is another heading, another paragraph, this is an image, and so on, right? And it's pretty straightforward, and I want it to be because HTML really isn't that fancy. It really is just labeling things. So if I turn back on the CSS, you can kind of see all the stuff CSS gives us, and that's why it's called the presentation layer. It actually makes it look like something beyond just labeling the content and providing structure like HTML does. And you can do this on any page. If I go to Facebook and disable all the styles on the page, you can see that this is HTML for Facebook. It is a bunch of content that's just labeled. This is text or a paragraph. This is a paragraph with links. This is a heading. This is what's called a form field. This is an image, this is paragraph with links, and so on. So you can really do this on any page to actually see what a website looks like without its CSS. But keep in mind that we are working on different layers. We're going to start with HTML and do a little CSS for this module. So if we flip over to brackets, where we kind of left off in the last video, we have our index.html file that we're going to work on. And the reason it's called index.html is something that we should note, is that's going to become our home page. So if we type in like my createUNL URL is adamwagler.createunl.com, it's going to go to an index.html file. Right? And then the CSS, we have named style.css. That's just kind of common practice, but this is what we're going to look at. For now, though, we're just going to focus on the HTML, so I'm going to turn off the split view and kind of make this a little bit bigger and kind of break down what we're looking at here. The first line is what's called a doctype, and that's an actually really important line because there are different types and different versions of HTML. Now, we're going to be working with HTML5 is what the version is called. There are previous versions that are out there, but the most current version and the one we should pay attention to is HTML5. And the doctype essentially tells the browser, hey, we're going to write HTML5, and everything below here you should expect in that particular format. If you think of it like AP style or APA style or Chicago or MLA style, it's just a writing style for HTML. Now, HTML is pretty basic. The older versions of HTML, once we do HTML5, you would recognize older versions. There's just some small differences between them. But for now, HTML5, that's what this first line tells us. And then if we look at things, we have open and close tags, or what they're called elements, HTML elements. So on line 2, we have the HTML tag, and you notice in brackets, the web editor actually has that tool built in where if we highlight a tag, you can see the open and you can see the closing tag. right? And this is what I mean by labeling. We're essentially labeling all this area as an HTML tag or an element. And that makes sense. This is the basic structure for the web. So we need to have HTML around the whole thing. And then we have two main sections in an HTML structure. We have what's called the head of the document. This is where we're going to link things and do some other stuff later on. We're not going to do a ton right now, with the exception of we're going to highlight untitled document and put our name, because we don't want to have something that's called untitled document. The character set we won't necessarily talk about, but we do need to have. It's just there, and we could talk about it later. But we have the head as one section, and probably the most important as we get started is what's called the body of the HTML, right? So body is really where all the content that you see on web pages actually shows up. So we're going to spend a lot of time actually creating things inside the body, which we'll actually put right here. This is called a comment. This essentially, this little less than sign with exclamation point, dash dash, and dash dash, and greater than. Anything we write in here is just kind of notes to ourselves. It won't actually show up in the browser, viewable to the user, but we can write notes and kind of label things as we go, which comes in pretty handy. So all this is kind of what we're working towards. We have HTML, which is the whole thing, and inside the HTML we have two main sections: the head, make sure we title it, and then the body. And then one thing we want to make sure we do is we want to save it, because we've already made a change, and you see the little dot here means we've made a change but we're not saved yet. So when we save it, that dot will go away. We know we're saved. And when you get started, when you do file and save, notice that there's shortcuts here, and I totally recommend just hitting Apple S on a Mac. If you're on a PC, it's Control S. But something to kind of get the hang of now, because it just saves yourself a lot of time. So all that is under the guise of we're actually building at this level right here. We're just going to be marking up content, and then we're going to add a little bit of CSS, which we'll kind of get into for the Web Module 1 here.